let's talk about Unit 3. Alright, so one of the big things about Unit 3 is knowing the formulas. So highly recommend using Quizlet or flashcards. And not only knowing the formulas, but knowing what each formula means and is used for. So, our first formula is m equals y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. What does this mean? Well, we have to know what each of the letters means. So let's start with our m. Okay, so m is your slope. So this formula is used to find slope. We can tell that because m is slope. Well, what about the rest of it? How do we know when to use it? What does the rest of it mean? Let's break it down. So the next thing I see is y2 and x2. These guys right here. And then I notice y1 minus x1. Well, what those actually are is they're coordinate points. So this is the second coordinate point. That's what the 2 means. So this is the second coordinate point you pick on a line. Or in a linear relationship if you want to sound fancy. So that's what the blue means. Okay? And then the second one is the first coordinate point you pick on a line. Now, it doesn't always have to be on the line. You could be given those and told that it's just 2 points on a line. You don't have to actually have the graph of the line. It just means these 2 points are related to each other some way, and you want to figure out what that relationship is. And the slope tells you that relationship. I always like to think as slope as an action. It tells you what to do. It tells you how to move. So that is your first little formula there. You're going to use that formula when you have 2 points. So anytime you have 2 points, you're going to use this formula. So if I gave you 3, 8 and 4, 12, and I said find the slope. I plug them into my formula. The first thing I always like to do is write the formula, because when you write the formula, it allows your math teacher to give you partial credit if you plug something in wrong. It also makes your brain take a second. Next thing I'm going to do is label my points to make sure I put them in the correct spots. Now that I've done all that pre-work, it's going to allow me to do this probably correctly. Taking that extra second to allow your brain to process makes you more likely to be successful. Okay, so I'm going to put the 12 in my y2 spot. I'm going to put the 8 in my y1 spot. I'm going to put the 4 in the x2 spot. I'm going to put the 3 in the x1 spot. So what we just did, by the way, is called substitution. We plugged a letter in for a number, so that's called substitution. Now, you actually can type that whole thing into your calculator, and I highly recommend doing that. I think sometimes we break things up too much. I really like the Desmos calculator because it makes it a little bit easier. If you don't have the Desmos, you have to do this parenthesis thing. Just helps make sure you're not making any mistakes. You can always just type the whole thing in the calculator. So, what that answer means is that the slope is 4, or up 4, right 1. I encourage you to take an extra second to interpret your slope when you're just learning, to help you realize that it really is a distance in points. I'm going to rough sketch this, so this is not where the actual points are. I just want you to kind of get a loose visualization. So let's say 3, 8 is here and 4, 12 is here. What that means is I go up 4 and right 1. If you have graph paper, you can always just graph these 2 points and count your rise over run. You don't have to do the formula. There's other ways to solve it. So again, that is your slope. If you want to be fancy, slope is delta y over delta x, which just means change in y over change in x. That doesn't make sense unless you know that this is your y-axis and this is your x-axis. So your y-axis is your up and your x-axis is your right. So that's the first formula. It helps you identify your slope from 2 points. You can always find extra practice on this on the internet by Googling things like practice finding slope given 2 points. So if you Google practice with slope given 2 points, you will get more practice on this. All right, that is your slope formula. Now let's talk about slope-intercept form. Okay, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. It can also be written this way. Doesn't matter. Let's make sure we understand what each of the parts mean. So we have our m. M is always going to mean the same thing. So m is your slope. Now you have to know that slope is change in y, or delta y, over change in x, or your rise of your right. The next part of your equation is your b. Notice how I'm boxing the plus sign. So the operator in front of the b tells you the sign of the b. If it's a negative or a minus sign, then your b is negative. B is your beginning, or your y-intercept. It's where it begins on the y-axis. So if you have a line, this is your y-intercept right there. So you'll have 0, comma b, where b is the number that it hits on the y-axis. So a little thing to help you remember is B for beginning. It's where it begins on the y-axis. Okay, begins on the y-axis. You can also think of it like interception, like in football. The y-axis is catching the football. So where did it catch the football at? Now the next part I feel like is the most easily confused part. This x and this y. Now, the x and y stand for any coordinate point on that line. Okay, so that means you can plug in any x, anything for x, and figure out what y is, and you can plug anything in for y to figure out what x is. So these change frequently. That's what you plug in. So you create your slope-intercept form so that way you have an equation that you can plug numbers into. So for example, let's say I was given 4x plus 1 equals y. Okay, let's identify the parts there. Your slope is 4. Your y-intercept is 1. To help you identify parts, I highly recommend writing your equation out underneath it. Number 1, that'll help you memorize the equation. Number 2, it'll allow your teacher to give you partial credit if you do it incorrectly. And number 3, it'll lessen the mistakes you make. Now, your x and y are any coordinate point on the line, which means, let's say I was making a table. Okay, so x's are here and y's are here. And I wanted to find out where the line was at these coordinate points. What I can do is I can plug in all of those coordinate points in for x, and it will give me all the y's. I missed. It should be -1. That's okay. It's just a happy accident. We like accidents because accidents help us learn. If we did everything correct all the time, we'd never learn anything. So again, if I decide these are all my x's, then I plug them in to my equation and get my y. And I'll just type that in my calculator. So if you struggle with graphing, remember, you can actually find a bunch of coordinate points and graph that way. You don't have to just count or do your rise over run or plot your y-intercept and move. You can find points on your line and then graph those points. This is called making a table. Now you can always just go ahead and plot your y-intercept and then do your rise over your run. But if that is hard, use your equation to help find points on your line. So these are all points on your line that you can graph to graph your line. And you can pick any number to plug in. See, there's lots of different strategies to graph a line, but we just don't usually teach all of them. But that's called making a table. You can also just have your coordinate plane and then graph your y-intercept, which is 1, and then do your slope, which is rise over 1. But a lot of times people forget that this is actually over 1, so they get distracted and they just go up and down. It needs to be at a diagonal. Let's do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll go right 1. There's my other line. So all those different ways are how you can graph a line given your slope-intercept form. You can find points and make a table. You can totally do that. Or you can just graph knowing your slope and your y-intercept. Just remember, if you're given a whole number as your slope, you need to go right 1. Always. All right. Hopefully you'll think about making a table, because sometimes tables can be extremely helpful. Okay, this was slope-intercept form and finding slope given a formula. Hopefully it helped. Have a great day, Algebros.